Hey guys, it's Dan with Warpaint JKU. If you want to know how to swap the hub assembly out on a Superduty Dana 60, you're going to want to check this out. You're also going to want to stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to show you a really cool little tool that I came across that's going to allow you to re-grease these sealed hub bearings and allow them to last way longer. Check it out. Guys, so before we get too far into this and taking it apart so I can show you how to do that, I'm going to show you the tools that you're pretty much going to need to be able to complete this job successfully and easily. Now, you're going to need a hammer. I have like a little mini sledgehammer here. I don't know exactly the weight on the head of this hammer. I want to say it's maybe about 5 pounds or so. It's actually a 4 pound. So nothing too crazy, but this is just enough, and I'll show you why in just a minute. You're going to need a breaker bar. It doesn't have to be overly long, right? I mean, this one fits in the wheel well of my Jeep, nice. It doesn't have to be anything crazy long, but you're going to definitely need it, and make sure it has a 1/2 inch drive socket on the one end. You're definitely going to need that. And at the same token, you're also going to need a torque wrench. So make sure you have those. Another thing you're going to need is just a plain old 1/2 inch socket ratchet. Along with that, you're going to need a 13/16 socket, okay? That 13/16 works on a couple of different things. You're definitely going to need that. You also need a 1/4 inch socket wrench. And you're going to need 2 hex heads or like an Allen key style. The first one you're going to need is going to be a 5mm, and then I believe this one's a 4.5. No, it's just a 4mm. There might be a couple other specialty tools that I'm going to have to use because of how I ran wheel speed sensor lines and things like that. But they're just things that most people have in their shop. One of those, for example, is just a pair of dikes, right? A pair of snips. So we're going to take care of that. And that's pretty much all you're going to need, right? So after you obviously have your wheel removed, and I'm not going to show you how to do that because if you don't know how to remove a tire or a wheel off of your axle, then this probably is not the job for you. But we've already done that, so now we're going to dive right in, start taking apart the rest of it. First thing that you're going to have to remove on your axle is probably going to be your brake caliper. Now there's 2 different ways to remove your brake caliper because your brake caliper has a bracket that holds it onto the knuckle as well as a caliper that is held into the bracket. Here's obviously going to be your brake caliper. Now your brake caliper has slide pins right up here that are going to allow the brake caliper to kind of move back and forth and do its thing. Now, if you were just putting in new brake pads, you didn't have to worry about taking the rotor off. You could just remove your brake caliper by taking these slide pin bolts out. There's one on top and there's one directly below on the bottom. It looks the same. They both have this rubber seal on them. So, but because we actually have to remove the brake rotor off of the hub assembly, we actually have to remove not only the brake caliper, but also the caliper bracket. So that's where your 13/16 socket comes in. You have one right up here on the knuckle. I've already loosened it a little bit with the breaker bar, and then you have one directly down on the bottom. Now it's really important when you put these back together that you use thread lock, and when you tighten them, that you tighten them to the proper torque spec. You can find that all over the internet. But after we remove these, again, you got to make sure that like all your cables and stuff are ready to go. And a really big tip is to make sure that you have a place to put this. You do not want the weight of this brake caliper hanging on your brake line or on your wheel speed sensor cable. Now, my brake line's pretty long, being a Jeep that flexes out a lot, and it's got long brake lines for that. But I have a toolbox right down here that we're going to take this brake caliper and set it down on top of so that these lines still have nice flex to them. All right, guys, sorry about the glare over here from my shop light, but it's pretty much all we can do. But here's the deal. So I basically secured my brake or my wheel speed sensor cable to the knuckle here using a zip tie. So I just had to clean that off. Once that was done, I'm going to use my 1/2-inch ratchet here with my 13/16 on it. I'm gonna remove the bottom bolt first. I'm gonna reach down here and find it. The reason I'm gonna do that is because I don't want this thing falling on my feet. These brake calipers on these Super Duties are big and they weigh a lot. So we definitely do not want that thing falling on our feet. Having that top bolt still in there is gonna allow us to remove this brake caliper and control where it goes. I'm gonna remove the top bolt. Now again, do this kind of carefully. Your brake caliper probably won't want to just fall right off, but it could, all right? There's essentially no bolts holding it in. It would just be the amount of pressure and friction that's on those brake pads. So you just want to be really careful with it, and we'll see what we can do here. All right, so you can see mine already started to fall. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take it, we're gonna lay it right down there on top of the toolbox, and inspect those brake pads while they're off. They actually look pretty good. Now that we have the brake caliper removed, resting on top of the toolbox, there's not a whole lot left holding on your brake rotor. The only thing that's probably holding it on is just some grime and dust and things like that. Every once in a while, you have to wind up hitting it with a rubber mallet. Now, I did not show you a rubber mallet in the beginning of this video because I just recently assembled this axle and put it together. I'm expecting it to come apart pretty easily. But do not hit this, okay? If you plan on reusing it, do not hit this with that 4-pound mini sledge that I just showed you a minute ago. So let's see if it comes off for us. See, just like that. A little bit of pressure, and it just slides right off nice and easily. We're gonna set it down right there. And I'm gonna give you a close-up look here at that wheel speed sensor and how it attaches. You can see the dust shield on here. That's held on by this whole hub assembly that we're gonna be removing in just a second. But if you look right down in here, this is where your wheel speed sensor attaches to your hub assembly. Now, if you remember in the beginning of the video, I said at the end of the video, I was gonna show you a way to maintain your hub bearing by adding grease to it periodically. Again, stick around and I'm gonna show you, because all you have to do is remove that brake caliper, remove your brake rotor once a year, okay? And then do exactly what I'm gonna show you at the end of the video, and your hub unit bearings are going to last way longer, okay, on these Super Duties than they have been for people in the past. Okay, a little funny side note here before we get started on this. You'll notice that the locking hub assembly says Ford. Now, these Ford Super Duty axles in 2005, they actually upgraded the locking hub assembly and the whole outer axle shaft to a 35 spline. It's a lot stronger. I haven't had any issues with this. Some people do when they're out rock crawling. When mine eventually breaks, I'll replace it, but it's held up just fine so far. And I'll show you when we take it apart and put it back together how you would rebuild this and reseal it. It's pretty easy to do. But anyway, guys, so right now there's basically 3 4mm bolts in this, and you're gonna remove those. And then in just a second, we might get to use that 4-pound mini sledgehammer, but we'll see, maybe not. Again, I just put this together not all that long ago, so we'll have to see what happens here. We're gonna see if this thing, how tight that guy is on there. Yeah, he's pretty tight. Okay, some gentle taps, okay? Gentle taps, and it'll knock it loose, and then you can start to work this guy out. And ooh, he's still fighting me a little bit. This is one of those basic tools that I said before that I didn't show you. Obviously, in here we basically have a straight flathead screwdriver, one that the tip is kind of destroyed on from using it on things like this. Basically, there's a little gasket in here, and I have a kit to replace it. I'm gonna try to save it, but basically we just wanna put a little pressure on that guy and get him to slide out, and there he goes. All right, so we're gonna pull this out. Looks like the gasket's gonna tear, so I don't think we're gonna be reusing that. But here we go. It's just gonna slide right out, and that's pretty much what it's gonna look like. And this one actually looks pretty good. Normally when these break, you see broken pieces all over this. This one's got a little bit of rust on it, but as you can see in here, it's pretty clean. The rust that's on this is actually from the junkyard, because again, these were junkyard axles. This new gasket is definitely keeping it clean, because I can tell I actually cleaned this rust off when I was rebuilding it. I lubed these up with some oil. I just used some gear oil, nothing crazy, but that's it. Guys. So inevitably, this is probably something I forgot to mention earlier in the tool section, probably because I was trying to block it out. But you need snap clip pliers, and you need not only snap clip pliers, you need long reach snap clip pliers. These on the end are kind of like a needle nose plier, but they have these two little nubs on them that'll fit inside of a snap ring, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second if you've never seen one. But you need the long reach ones because you're going to be reaching all the way in there on that inner axle shaft, or on that outer axle shaft, and there's a snap ring in there that we have to remove. Let's check it out. Okay, guys. So check out what I just noticed. If you look in there, you can see that snap ring really well, right? But here's the problem with that snap ring. Let me find a pick. Okay, here's the problem with that snap ring. Now that you can see it so well, check this out. See it moving? It is not supposed to do that. Look at that. I didn't even have to use the tool to get it off. Holy cow. So before we go any further here, okay, that probably, there's a couple of reasons why that could have came off. That probably came off just simply because I reused the old snap ring, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when I took this axle apart and was rebuilding it, I reused the snap ring that was in there and put it back together. Now, could just be that I thought the snap ring was in there secured and it wasn't, and it worked its way off. Could be that the hub bearing was bad. Either way, I have it this far apart. We're still going to replace the hub bearing. But if you look inside, you have some splines, okay? Now, these splines are the splines that are in your hub bearing. As I turn the axle, notice those splines turn, but notice the axle shaft, right? It's marked with that little bit of grease at the top there. Notice that is not turning, okay? So that's exactly what that locking hub does. When you activate that locking hub and you turn that switch in the end, it winds up locking these splines to the splines on the outer part of your axle shaft. And then as you turn this, everything in the front axle turns. All right, guys, so for the next part of this, I'm actually going to use an impact gun. On the back of the knuckle, okay, there are 4 nuts, one basically in each corner, and that's exactly what holds this onto the vehicle, okay? So we are going to remove that in just a second, and that's how I'm going to break those loose on the back. We're going to use an impact gun with an extension. We may have to turn the wheels so that I can access the rear and then turn it back the other way to access the front. All right, guys, so now that we have all 4 of the nuts on the back removed off of those studs that hold this hub assembly onto the knuckle, now it's time to deal with the wheel speed sensor. So this wheel speed sensor attaches right on the top, right under your brake rotor. And it's got a 5mm bolt in the end of it. So back to that 1/4-inch wrench with your 5mm bolt. Now, you're gonna want to reuse this on a Jeep because this wheel speed sensor on a Jeep is actually from a Dodge Ram. Even though this is a Ford Super Duty axle, the Dodge Ram other end actually attaches to your wiring harness on your Jeep, and this end actually plugs into the Ford unit bearing. So it's pretty cool that it does that. You're just gonna want to work it out nice and slow, and sometimes they get a little stuck in there, but you definitely don't want to break. Sometimes, usually, these do not want to come off. They are like really frozen in there. This one's not that bad because I built this axle just a couple thousand miles ago, and I tried reusing the hub bearing that it had come with from the junkyard. Obviously that didn't work so well. Now, if that becomes an issue, okay, and you can't remove it, there's a trick. You can actually use a 13/16 socket. You can take the nut that was on the back, and because this nut has this little flange on it right here, it actually doesn't drop all the way into your socket. It just sits there nice and flat. And you can actually thread that on a little bit, and then you can bang on this end, you know, with that mini sledge, and it'll wind up pushing it out a little bit without having to get back there and wail on it with the. Yep, we're good. We're not gonna have to bang on it at all. This guy is just gonna come right out. This right in here is that machined ring. You can actually see that little gap in there. That's where that, excuse my disgusting hands, but that's where that gap would go for that snap ring that we took off earlier. Mine wasn't in, so I assume it wasn't on and seated correctly, but obviously when we put it back together, we're gonna make sure that that happens. This is obviously the back side of the hub bearing assembly. This would be the top when you installed it, right? That's that forward wheel speed sensor that we're gonna have to remove in a second. And this is where those studs were, right? There's 4 of them, one in every corner. And this is that stud that we're gonna wind up putting in there. Now the kit came with new ones, but just for good measure, I'm gonna put a little bit of blue thread lock on each one here as I thread it in. Now, it's never really gonna loosen up by design just because of the way that this slides in. All right, guys, now it's gonna be time to take that new hub bearing and slide it on. Again, you can see these are the 4 holes that those studs are gonna slide through. The nuts go on the back side. Again, you're gonna torque them down to the manufacturer's specifications, remembering that it is a Ford axle. Just look up the model year. You can do that on the internet. You can find that nice and easily. And the flip-flops, they're OSHA approved. So don't worry about that, all right? Just don't tell anybody about it either. So here's what we're gonna do. I already got the, I already have the dust shield placed back on there again. You're gonna make sure that your wheel speed sensor is on top. We're gonna line up the holes. We're going to take the new snap ring and our snap ring pliers. We're going to try to hopefully fairly easily slide this guy on with these long rings. Okay, so the rebuild kit comes with a couple of new rubber O-rings. I'm not gonna actually install those. There's really no reason. This one's pretty new. And it comes with a new gasket. You're definitely gonna wanna make sure that that new gasket goes on there. But you're basically just gonna slide it in, line it up. All right, so if you ever wanted to try to prolong the life of that sealed hub bearing for that Superduty Dana 60, again, whether you have it in a Jeep or you have it in an F-250 or F-350 truck, doesn't matter. It's the same system with the same wheel speed sensor in there. That wheel speed sensor can be removed, and when you look down in there, you will see the tone ring that spins around for that wheel speed sensor. But here's the cool part. That wheel speed sensor does not matter if it's covered in grease or not. It still functions perfectly fine because it works off of basically a magnet, and that's not affected by the grease. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to a company called Riff, Raff Diesel. Riff Raff Diesel has machined this little part, okay, which has an O-ring on the bottom, as you can see, and a grease zerk on the top. In a second, I'm gonna show you, you're gonna remove that wheel speed sensor, you're gonna insert this back in, you're gonna use the same bolt to install it, you're gonna snug it up, put your grease gun on the top, shoot a couple pumps of grease down in there, do it about once a year, and bolt it back together, put your wheel speed sensor back in, and you're good to go. Okay, it's always good practice to clean your brake rotor before reinstalling it onto your axle. I've already wiped down the one side. I'm gonna try to touch it as little as possible so that we can wind up getting it on and keeping it clean. All right, guys, so there you have it. Obviously, after the rotor went back on, the wheel went back on, you torque the lug nuts down. Just make sure everything gets torqued to spec, and obviously in this video, if you need to replace your wheel speed sensor or something like that, this video is also going to show you how to take it apart to get to that point, right? Just remember, on the Dana 60, if you have this in your Jeep from a Super Duty, you're going to need that wheel speed sensor out of a Dodge Ram. I will also put those details in the description, as well as a couple of tools in there that you're definitely going to need to specifically do this job. That's it, guys. I appreciate the support. Make sure you definitely hit that subscribe button. Lots of videos coming, lots of builds coming, and we're even going to be doing some giveaways. So stay tuned to check it all out. Thanks again.